ahead and start the recording so I don't forget. 6. So I got your papers all corrected, and you should have them on Moodle, and I hope you looked at them. I'm not mostly grading on form unless it's hard to understand what you're trying to say, and there are a couple of those. But I am making comments about your writing. A couple of you are still using lots of making lots of major errors, comma splices, and I think there are a couple of sentence fragments. Although the sentence fragments were complicated, it took a while to get them. I recommended to a couple of you a book called Elements of Style by Struck and White. And White is the guy who wrote Charlotte's Web, E.B. White. He also wrote a grammar. It's a little grammar book, really thin. And its table of contents is fantastic. Do I put a comma there? You just go to the comma section in the book, and it's in the table of contents, and you just read that part. It's the best reference guide I've ever had. I had to take what they call bonehead English in college at Berkeley. Was it at Berkeley? No, it was at UCLA. And they called it bonehead English because they had no problem making us feel like we were idiots. But it's probably one of the best classes I ever took. Just because I learned a bunch of stuff. And then when I went to graduate school, I took grammar classes because I had to. And it was really amazing to me how grammar works. Anyway, the papers were good. I want you to delve a little bit deeper into them. Not all of you. Into the plays, I mean. Go as deeply as you can. And you know, the plays will tell you how far you can go. Any more thoughts about rhinoceros to open up today? No one? Okay. I want to show you how Zero Mostel and Gene Hackman handled the transformation scene of Jean as this went on. So I'm going to share this. I think I have it up there. There it is. And share. And make it big. Where's make it big? That's not the thing I need. There we go. All right. This is Zero Mostel at his very, very best.
You should get some rest. Have you called the doctor?
Why should I call the doctor?
Let me call one for you.
I don't want to call a doctor because I don't want the doctor.
But you should get some competent medical advice.
Doctor,
They do it in good faith.
Then illnesses, I tell you, then mental. You must go find some food. Anyway, the only doctors I trust are veterinarians.
John, your veins are jutting out.
It's a sign of virility.
Oh, even so.
What are you doing? Scrutinizing me as if I was some strange animal.
Tim.
What's my skin got to do with it? I don't want to talk about my skin. Do I talk about your skin? Well, do I?
It's listen, it's changing color. Seems to be getting gray. It's getting harder, too.
Stop with me. I told you to stop scrutinizing me. What's the matter with you? You're getting on my nerves.
John, I'm going to call a doctor.
Now, call your doctor.
It's for your own good.
I know better than you what's good for me.
John, you're breathing very hard.
That's the way I breathe. Breathe the best I can. You don't like my breathing? I don't like your breathing. You breathe as if you're going to drop dead any second.
No, don't get angry. I'm only trying to be a friend.
I don't want your friendship, and I don't believe in friendship. I don't want
That's a silly thing to say. You're certainly in a misanthropic mood today.
Yes, I'm misanthropic. Very misanthropic indeed. And I enjoy being misanthropic.
If you're still angry about yesterday, I've admitted it was my fault. It was just a silly quarrel.
What silly quarrel are you talking about?
Oh, about the rhinoceros.
It's not that I hate people. I'm just indifferent to them. Let's say they disgust me, and I'd better stay out of my way, or I'll run into them. And I'm going straight for them.
And of course, then he stop sharing. And then of course he runs into the bathroom and comes out with and a rhinoceros comes out as a rhinoceros with his horn coming through the door. Any thoughts about that? Does that give you some clues into the play itself and into its major theme?
It goes into the irony of the title.
Yes. He turns into a rhinoceros right before our very eyes.
Yeah, I like, at least from the design perspective, it's very on the nose, or I guess on the horn. It's very funny how he just takes all the meat out of his fridge. Thank you, Val. And starts just eating veggies and putting on a gray coat. And it's just everything they can do besides give him a literal horn.
Which, well, they sort of do later. Who is that? Is that Al? Is that you, Alan?
Yeah, sorry, I'm trying to find.
No, I was
the thing in my
wondering who
notes.
just said that. Who just said that?
Oh,
It
that
was me,
Aiden.
it was Hayden.
Oh, okay. Hi, Aiden. Yeah, it's the transition is, and Zero Mostel is good at those things. He does stuff. He does similar kind of this complete transformation of personality. Great, Alan. What did you have to say?
I was just gonna. I had some notes about this. This is just the in the scene in the play itself. It's a really interesting because a lot of the people always mention like later on in the play, Berenger talks about how horrifying it was seeing his friend change before his very eyes, and it was that was very on the nose in the sense of on the nose, Jesus. It related. I related a lot to it with just how people would seem to change their ideologies with the whole spread of fascism and stuff. And even now, like we can see this with people that we know. Like I've seen people that have just seemingly changed over the years, whether it's ideology and stuff, or just the way their attitude about life. And yeah, sorry. The
Good.
transformation with Zero Mostel was really
And
comedic.
go ahead.
Oh,
I'm
yeah.
sorry. Keep going.
Well, I was just gonna say it's really comedic, and it was really played into this whole horror, I guess, or the disturbingness. Sorry.
Comments about that?
One thing I would say about the movie, I haven't watched the whole thing, but from the clips we've seen, on the heels of actually reading the play, for me personally, this is my opinion, it's so funny, or like I just think Zero Mostel is so ridiculous that it actually it almost like lessens the impact than when I read the play, because I mean the play is kind of over the top too. Like I mean I guess that's how it's supposed to be performed, but it's so I just think of like between him and Gene Wilder, I think of like the producers, and it's just them together. It's like it's like I just kind of get distracted from the theme because it's just like the screwball comedy is so on point with him that I'm just more preoccupied with the literal transition of him becoming a rhinoceros. The theme of what it's actually going for kind of gets lost on me when I watch someone like that.
Did some, just from that scene, did anybody see any articulation of the theme besides quickly changing your ideology, hating humans? What else was helped? What else helped bring out the theme in terms of autocrats and kind of fringe folk?
I can say one more thing about that. Just his like resistance to any rational thought being presented to him.
And the defensiveness.
Yeah, like immediately like taking it as an attack almost and like shooting anything down.
I was gonna say it feels very familiar, like as soon as someone is, I don't know, approached about what's going on with them, they just deflect. They're like, well, don't look at me, look at you. This is wrong with you more, I guess. Or
it seems like his personality, he becomes more belligerent and sort of, I mean, he says like he feels misanthropic, he doesn't like other people, and I know that in the context is like he's a rhinoceros, so he doesn't like humans, but it also feels similar to the fascist ideology of kind of throwing people under the bus and becoming obsessed with yourself. And this sort of,
we call it whataboutism.
yeah, and this sort of like the rhinoceros reminds me of like the idea of an Aryan race of like it's better, it's pure and it's perfect, but like the show, it kind of almost helps highlight the absurdity of that by making it like a rhinoceros, which is ridiculous, but it's not that different from, you know, the, like we've been talking about earlier, the Nazi sort of appropriation of the Uberman or Ubermensch idea.
Right.
Except now it's like it's a rhino, which is like, it's funny. It's sort of, the comedy to me feels very intentional and sort of almost like a way to cope with the reality of the subject matter, to sort of put it through this filter that makes it easier to digest.
Right. And the play actually, generally, if you're watching it and you have a good director, I've only seen it once, and they had a really good Jean Berenger. I just didn't think it was the person who directed it actually understood the transition of the play. The movement of the play through time is that it gets darker and darker, and by act 3 it's very, very dark. And when we read it, we don't often see that because the mood, the darkness of the play doesn't necessarily come through. So as you're reading plays, in terms of theater, you need to really put yourself in the mood, or not put yourself, but be very sensitive to the mood of the play as it moves through, and don't let the comedy of the first act affect you as it moves toward the last act. I find myself saying, how would I stage that? What would that look like? I try to imagine scenes as I read, and it's really difficult for me because I don't have a good visual. I don't think in images, whereas someone like Sean thinks in images and sees the, and takes in the different elements. I'm sure he reads the stage directions and what the set looks like a lot clearer than I do, more carefully than I do. But he's real sensitive to the mood, and of course, is Michael teaching this year? No, Michael's gone.
You mean Mike Stanfield?
Yeah.
Stanfield? Yeah, he's teaching this year.
Oh, good. Just good for you guys. And we don't know what's going to happen, but anyway, Mike is a lot more sensitive to that too. Even, well, Mike's ability to understand plays from the page to the stage is really amazing to me. Me too, Valentine. So it's you know it's trying to develop that sensibility to be able to um to envision what the possibilities are on stage. And so that's one of the reasons that actors need design training, is because even when that's not your part, understanding the play as a whole is of course one of the needs you have in performance. And I've always thought of Zero Mostel and Gene Wilder as kind of personality actors. They need to fit the part, and I'm not sure how true that is. I also don't know how close Zero Mostel was to the Holocaust. I don't know when his family came to America. I don't know if my family came to America in the 1920s, so I didn't have relatives that I know about involved with the Holocaust because they weren't in Europe. But I don't know what his personal situation is, but he does do, this is his style of acting, and he doesn't generally move too far from that kind of bombastic over the top comedic acting. At least I haven't seen him do that. Any other kinds? Really the defensiveness that strikes me in this, and that's what's shared in turning into a rhinoceros and turning into an autocrat, is that especially at the beginning, your ideas are unpopular and you become very defensive about that because there's evidence that you're wrong and you don't want to see that evidence. You know, there's evidence that there's no there, and yet in your mind there is. I didn't mean to go like that. So I thought it was a fantastically directed scene. Yeah, Alan.
Ooh, there we go. Well, what's funny looking at that is the defensiveness is just, with all the rhino or the people before they become rhinos and with autocrats, it's very like insecure sort of like an insecure mindset. And it's really funny because well, with the idea of Berenger being an outcast, you'd think that he would be the most insecure out of all of them, but he seems to be the most sound of mind in his ideas. Whereas all the people that become rhinos are more like in the, and not the popular crowd, but they're more accepted in society and stuff.
Okay. At the beginning, but especially when you
Yeah,
talk about Berenger, he changes a lot through the play. And they highlight that in this next video. This is a interview with a woman who saw the original production, along with some clips from that original production. So of course the production was in French. It was in 1960 at the Odeon in Paris. And in France, if you remember your theater history, most of the big theaters are in Paris, professional theaters. They also develop after modernism came in and all these weird little theaters came up. They developed a system of regional theaters that are funded by the government. Germany did that too. So they have about 5 or 6 theaters throughout the country that are government funded, kind of like OSF, but better funded. They still need patrons and stuff like that, but the government kicks in a large portion to make sure that they have freedom to do their artistic stuff. So let me see if I can find that one. I may have to go to, I'm not sure. I need to get out of that. And I think I have to do this at home. I mean, without sharing. So give me just a second to move to underneath you guys. No, I don't need to do that. I can go to here. Stop it. Nope. Go. Sorry, I just have to talk my way through this stuff because I'm not very good at it. No, I can't. Oops, what did I do? Oh, I know. There you guys are. So now I can share screen. Oops, peekaboo. That's my niece and nephew. All right. So and a woman who saw this is the one who narrates it. UMS, I don't know where, University of Minnesota State, Michigan State. I should have looked that up. I didn't. But it's not their production that we're talking about till the very end. It's the original production. It's kind of self-explanatory. That's Jean.
Night of the first representation, all the newspaper were full of analysis and synopsis, but it certainly everybody talked about it. I came to Ann Arbor the year Rhinoceros was presented in Europe, and I saw it before coming to Ann Arbor. And I must say that I have a memory of, naturally a memory of the play. I was with a very good old friend of mine, and we went because the play was very advertised and everybody knew and were talking about it.
Et alors, y suis-je allé, moi?
Bah, c'est peut-être justement parce que vous n'avez pas été invité que...
Messieurs, que voulez-vous boire?
Non, je n'ai pas été invité, en effet, on ne m'a pas fait cet honneur. Je peux vous affirmer que même si j'avais été invité, je ne serais pas venu. Car si j'avais été invité, moi, contrairement à vous, eh bien, je... Qu'est-ce qui se passe-t-il? Qu'est-ce que c'est?
The first act was funny and a little goofy and a little... Second act came to be really more serious. And the third act was, because it ends on a very sad note, but it certainly, when you leave, it makes you think. It's not something you just say, oh, goodbye. It's very deep.
Vous avez été quelquefois contre les sociologues, contre les auteurs engagés, contre ceux qui livraient un message. Est-ce que là, vous n'avez pas quand même été un petit peu dans leur sens à eux?
Oui, j'ai été à la fois dans leur sens à eux et contre eux. Ils m'ont reproché d'écrire des pièces sans message, ce qui est parfaitement compréhensible. Et au moment où j'ai écrit une pièce à message, ils m'ont grondé parce que le message était contre eux.
Well, I saw other plays by UNESCO, and I enjoy them, but not as much as Rhinoceros. Rhinoceros is really a cornerstone. This time I will really pay attention to the dialogues and the text, because I'm prepared for the emotions. I will just really take in, especially the third act, the last 10 minutes. That's where everything is so important. And that leads you to the very last sentence. Je ne capitulerai pas. I will not give in.
Je ne capitule pas.
So there you go. It's Michigan State. Okay, I hope that doesn't start into something else now. because I can't find it. So some of the information she gives, I think, is pretty significant. I love the rhino head, and it's a shame that of the camera. It's a shame that the camera angle was pointing in the direction that Jean exits through the wall. And the rhinoceros head comes in through another one. If it had been straight on, it would have been a better illusion. But I love that rhinoceros head. It was 1960, so it wasn't a cheap production. And if you notice the wall, there was the breakaway wall had a real thickness to it. So he really had to kick his way through. So any comments about that? Any thoughts?
Was the show originally written in French?
Yes, Ionesco was Romanian, but he wrote in French. He was displaced by the war also because Romania became a part of went Nazi pretty early on. And of course, Romania is where Dracula lives too. So you'd expect that, right? Just kidding.
How much did it cost again to make that rhinoceros head? Just
I
for
have
that?
no idea. I don't know. In 1960s, in America, at least, you were still paying 25 cents a gallon for gas.
So it took a long time, but still, back in those times, it was like very expensive to at least make that kind of head, in that production. Because did you say that they were funded more than us or a different theater?
Everybody's funded more than us. Not everybody, but of the most European countries have state subsidized theater. Britain does, or England does. Ireland certainly does. France, Germany. I think Spain still does, but I'm not positive, and I don't know about Portugal over there. But most have state-sponsored theaters, and it's a long tradition there. It's been that way since like the 1750s. Because remember, monarchies sponsored theater because it was a way of showing off your wealth. And impressing foreigners. And culture was considered important in Europe, and it still is, and it's never been considered important here in the US. We kind of took the capitalism in England and brought it over here and left everything else behind. I mean, there's been times when theater has been done in America, but it's always been done on a shoestring. That's why they call it the little theater movement back in the 1900s to 1920s. But in Europe, it's always been subsidized theater. There's a very different cultural aesthetic in Europe. So, and remember, there was no Germany, so all those all those states were kind of very small, living close together to each other. So having a strong cultural identity for your duchy or your your small nation state was more important back then. But I think having steam come out of the rhinoceros's nose was pretty high tech then. Now we would just plunk a piece of dry ice in some water. You didn't need to have someone's head in there. It just was a puppet that moved. So it wasn't a realistic rhinoceros. It was stylized, but at the same time, it kind of indicated the sort of fear you would have of a wild animal coming at you. Did I answer your question, Marco?
Yeah.
I think that the last part, and I'm not sure, I think that was the college production, but I'm not sure. The film seemed to be pretty black and white, and then it kind of changed the color. I'm not sure where that final image came, where he was up on top of the tower, if that was the movie or I mean the play, or the the original play, or the one from Michigan State. I just don't know. But you know, they didn't record full productions back then because, first of all, it was illegal, but at the same time, they just didn't keep records like that anymore. It's kind of what separated the movies from live theater. Any other?
I I have a question. This play, okay, so this is an absurdist play in the same way that Waiting for Godot is.
Well,
Like, I'm curious. I'm just curious, like, they feel very different to me, you know?
They are, and none of these plays have connections with other playwrights. This wasn't like the modernists who had manifestos and were actually making a uniform statement through their art. This is more like a bunch of different people were doing this strange kind of theater all over the world, and this guy, God, what's his name? Can't find his book. Estlin saw that there were these kind of strange types of theater, and they weren't coming out as these tiny productions that then grew because of popularity. Waiting for Godot had producers that produced it, and after being so inflexible in terms of what theater was for so many centuries, France became a place with lots of experimentation. And in the movies in the 1960s, French artists were a part of the new wave of theater coming on. And there were movie makers who were also being very, very innovative. But movies and theater are really separate kinds of art forms, one being permanent and the other being temporary. Once you see a production on stage, you never see the same production again, even if you go back the next night. It's a little bit different. But yeah, this was kind of a movement that just popped up all over the place. They came out different years, so it could have been that Beckett's aesthetic kind of filtered into other people's thinking in terms of what theater could do. Like I say, Beckett is considered one of the major innovators in theater, on comparison to Shakespeare and others who have changed theater forever. It was just a completely different kind of theater that more fully used theatrical language. Shakespeare was language based. Not Euripides. Aeschylus was kind of epic based. The grandeur of his plays, and the dignity of all the characters, who of course were mythical characters, although he was the only playwright to write a historical play that we have in Greek drama. Anyway, so there could have been that kind of influence, but really the aesthetic came from environmental factors, which is why absurdism really came from Europe, because that's where World War II was fought. And even in my life, I was born in 1959. Even in my life, I've never lived a day without the knowledge that, well, I did when I was a baby, but without the knowledge that several countries in the world could annihilate the entire world through nuclear weapons. And for you guys, it's even been more of a kind of a normalized situation. But for these guys, it wasn't at all. They lived through World War II and saw the bomb happen and saw the devastation of culture completely collapsing in on itself. The Nazis controlled everything. The Minister of Propaganda was in charge of plays and movies, and there was really strong censorship. And these kinds of plays wouldn't have been allowed in Nazi Germany. It had to be realism, and it had to support the state's it had to support the state's politics and what they wanted. So it was very heavily censored, as it was in the Soviet Union for a while. Meyerhold who was an innovative theater guy in Russia, worked with Stanislavski, ran the experimental theater side of the Moscow Art Theater, and he had developed a method called biomechanics, in which movement and ballet was the primary communicator within the plays. He did a very famous production of The Inspector General, which is a run-of-the-mill play. We did it during the we did a production of it during the pandemic. And in the movie, it was Danny Kaye. If you know him, his movies are different than everybody else's movies because he's such a distinct artist in his singing and his dancing and his characters. But The Inspector General was a very famous modernist play by Gogol, and Meyerhold, who put on a production of it before the communist takeover, was arrested and sent to a concentration to a gulag. Sorry, I was mixing my autocratic prisons. Sent to a gulag in Siberia and was never heard from again. Whereas Stanislavski, whose style was accurate realism in both acting and on stage, which was a different tradition. He was left in charge of the Moscow Art Theater because his plays weren't considered against the state, whatever you call it. And Soviet Russia was very supportive of the arts, as long as it was the right arts. So what was the original question, Rosie?
I was just, you answered my question a while ago. I was just wondering about like the difference between Rhinoceros and Waiting for Godot, how aesthetically they feel very different. But you were saying that part of that is because absurdism is not like a unified movement in the same way as other movements.
So part of the absurdist movement is the placement of the action in a world that does not follow the same rules that our world does. In other words, if you look at Waiting for Godot as a realistic play, it doesn't really make sense. Why didn't they leave? Well, this is a world in which they couldn't leave. This was the entire world of those two tramps. It's a very plastic world. It was a very specific created world, which is why Beckett sued because of the Mabou Mines production, because it took it out of a room with two windows upstage, and he has two garbage cans downstage, stage right, I think. Beckett's very specific in his stage directions, and that's a major part of the language he incorporates into his theater. So, and only two of his plays really are language based, Godot being one of them, and that language is made to divert us from what's happening in the bigger picture. So these two plays share that same aesthetic, that we're in a world outside of our own reality, but it's very similar to our reality. In other words, people behaved as if they were people seeing other people turned into rhinoceri, and at first it was disgusting to them and scary, and they thought it escaped from the zoo. And as the play goes on, it gets darker and darker, and more people want to do that, want to change into rhinoceri, as we saw Monday, with Daisy, with Karen Black playing Daisy. Berenger had always been, well, you read the play, so Berenger's in love with her already, and he finally wins the girl, but she's taken over by this aesthetic. That's okay, Kyle, you can come in, grab your shoes. By the way, we're guarded today by Venus, who is head of security at our house and is sitting between the two doorways to the outside and to the rest of the house. Jasmine left. She doesn't like Ionesco very much. So anyway, they share traits, Rosie, but they don't share they don't really share common themes. And you're going to see this in Genet, whose aesthetic is very different in The Maids. He's a playwright I really like, but he's kind of scary. He's only got 3 major plays, but he also has some prose work that he did. But as I say, we'll talk about him next week, but he was a very unique kind of artist in France, and his aesthetic came from he lived in a criminal underground and was a part of that before he became a playwright. But that was a great question, because I actually never really address absurdism in a way that what makes these plays similar and what makes these plays different from each other. So it's kind of it's none of these playwrights said I'm an absurdist playwright. Certainly Tom Stoppard, who wrote Rosencrantz and Guildenstern Are Dead, did not consider himself an absurdist, but he wrote plays that kind of freed themselves from the real world. Some of them were a lot more traditional, but most of them were, I don't know how many of you are familiar with Rosencrantz and Guildenstern Are Dead, but it's a play that the world takes place within the greater world of Hamlet. There are 2 minor characters in Hamlet who have to kind of deal with being killed every production of Hamlet. It's very similar in aesthetic to what's it called? The Return of Hedda Gabler, written by Jeff Whitty, which is a play about the character who gets killed at the end of every performance of every play, and doesn't want to be killed anymore, and doesn't really like her character very much. And she and Mammy from Gone with the Wind, and 2 gay characters from The Boys Next Door. Is it The Boys Next Door or Boys in the Band? It's The Boys Next Door. Anybody remember that? Quinto and the guy from The Big Bang Theory just did a revival of it.
I think it is The Boys in the Band.
Okay, I get those 2 mixed up. That's the play that was the first kind of outwardly gay play that was popular on Broadway, and it has a weird history, but it also started most of the gay stereotypes that in the 1960s that went on to dominate our society's vision of what being gay was. And of course, it's all the outward trappings. I think it's a really good play, but it was just so effective that it brought people believed what it told them. So yeah, Jim Parsons, thank you, man. It brought in kind of the effeminate, and it brought in the kind of dominant gay character. It brought in that kind of limp wrist, and forever this was a signal that someone was gay. and it has nothing to do with anything about being gay. It has to do with characters from media that portrayed gay characters. And of course, almost always there are just signifiers, thank you very much, on stage that give us information that's much bigger than what they were, and sometimes they're false. So anyway, so Ionesco and Beckett are not seen with as similar playwrights. They're both seen as absurdists, because this idea was very, very new, of a world of the play that did not that had nothing to do with our world. And it was also very, very old, because that was prior to the modernist period. There was no attempt at actual realism on theater. That started in the 1700s and was not popular for a while, because they thought it was cheap theater, because actors were supposed to be artists that demonstrated through their movement and vocalization how talented they were, just like you judge poets by the way they read their poems rather than reading the poems yourself, or at least that used to be the kind of judgment. Poems were made to be heard, not read, a lot of people believe. I guess that's kind of a old-fashioned idea too. But so Ionesco, and I'm changing the subject now, kind of moving forward. Ionesco, this is different from most of his plays. Most of his plays are much less, are much more abstract. In the lesson, well, here, let me, if I can do it, let me show you. Absurdism. No, I'm trying to find just the video that, or the PDF, I can't remember the thing, what I was showing you before. I don't have it there. There it is. And then let me go. These are just a few tiles. Okay, and then go back to you guys. Where are you? Share screen and go to here. There we go. There's good old Eugene Ionesco when he was an old man. So he was Romanian. He spent much of his life in France. I don't have very much. There's two tiles. I guess I should put it up so you can't see what I'm going to do. It's a secret. There's a couple tiles and some pictures of his productions. But he focused on language mostly, which was different from Beckett. Although Beckett did that also, but Ionesco distrusted words and language as an effective mode of communication. And most scholars see that as something that he learned early on when Romania was taken over by the Nazis, or moved to a Nazi autocratic government, because they were saying one thing and doing something else, just like all autocratic governments do. And so he felt that there was a danger to language. In his short play, The Lesson, a pupil comes in and she's very energetic. She's coming in for a lesson by her tutor, who's a professor, and he's very weak and unsure of himself. And by the end of the play, the movement is because of his station in life, he becomes more assertive as he goes on, and she becomes more meek simply by the nature of their positions in the world. And that's a very postmodern idea, that we are predisposed to believe and follow those in authority. And so for the lesson, he kind of juxtaposed this girl who was very sure of himself and very confident, and as she interacted with this professor, she became less confident, and more, and he became more powerful because he had knowledge of things that she didn't have knowledge of. I believe he was kind of an idiot too. He was he wasn't he was more autocratic, and that's kind of how he was portrayed. I don't like the play very much simply because I don't like the professor being autocratic. I prefer the professor from Gilligan's Island, who was always very nice and might have even had an affair with Ginger or Marianne. Who knows? Sorry about that. So this is just a analysis of rhinoceros, which we've already talked about a lot. The last bullet point is the most important part. The analysis of the play reveals a metaphor for the Nazi influence on the German people. He contrasts the desire to discard humanity and questions the origins of true heroism, suggesting that the heroes are not brave, but simply have no choice but to battle the status quo. And this might even be said of the civil rights movement. It might be said of what's happening in the Middle East right now, that revolutionaries are revolutionaries because they have no choice. And I think the exception to that might be the American Revolution, which a lot of people argue is not a revolution at all, but was simply a change of the people in power from one elite country to the elites of another country. And I'm not in a position to argue yay or nay on that. I don't know. But here are a bunch of his plays. I like this one here. Oops, can't do that. That's Jean Genet for next week. I like the paper rhinoceri because just because of those rhinoceros heads. I really like them. But the lesson is the one I was talking about. It's kind of a goofy play, and you can see that kind of physicalized. The Bald Soprano I've read, but it was a long time ago. I believe that there's a dead body in the next room in that play, and they deal with the dead body as if it's a normal everyday occurrence. And it's the function of language within these power structures that he really focuses on. And in the beginning, Berenger is a very, very weak character. He's almost pathetic. He doesn't care about anything that has to do with politics. He denies the importance of politics. And through no fault of his own, he has to take a stance because he has no idea what's going on. And so it's his ignorance, and then his inability to become a rhinoceros that really guide him. And that's the idea that I kind of want to get some feedback from you guys. Do you see that as a true idea, a truth in the world, that those who are heroic are the ones who don't choose to be heroic?
I'll take a whack at it. I think that creating a binary system of there can either only be people who were born naturally heroic and have been heroic their whole lives, or people who are put in a situation where they are a normal person in an absurd or like otherwise chaotic scenario. Like there's a huge like a gray area between like someone being forced into heroism and someone who was like predetermined for it. So I think like there's both. And I think that more commonly it's going to be just normal people that sort of get forced into the situation. But there are also people who everyone would expect to be your hero, and then they still do heroic and like kind and notable things. So I think it's a little bit of both.
Okay. And I'm always harping on, don't think of literary or theatrical heroes as real people. They are created from the mind of someone for a purpose. Alan, what do you got for us?
I agree with Val a lot with a lot of that stuff. I feel like the idea of well, that heroes won't choose the heroic path is it plays more into like the social standard of people idealizing being good and not necessarily doing good things because it's the right thing to do, but more so doing good things so you fit in with society and people will like you. So I feel like the people that just try to be good people so they fit in are more susceptible to, I guess, corruption or any shift in social status quos. Whereas people who don't necessarily follow that sort of ideology, those social standards, they are more, I guess, individuals. Sort of, there's still like a chance of them forging their own path.
Okay. So it sounds to me like what you're talking about is what is the romantic hero, which is a literary figure. Quasimodo, Cyrano de Bergerac. There are others. There are many others who became Frankenstein, the monster in Frankenstein. These are kind of romantic heroes who are judged by the content of their character rather than anything else. But they're presented as being elite. They are naturally better than we are. And often they have faults that or physical deformities that play counter so that people don't like them. They're forced to be an outsider. And for a romantic, being an outsider forces you to get in touch with your humanity. And if you're like Robin Hood, you're forced out of society. And therefore you have no choice to be a hero. But then there's the whole nobility that Robin Hood came from. His lands were stolen. His father was punished by the king, and his lands were taken away, and so he was forced to go outside. But that aristocratic nature in him is still there. But that's a literary character. One of the heroes of World War II is George Patton. Does anybody know who George Patton is? There was a movie about him. He was a general, but from a very young age, he knew he wanted to be a military man. He knew he wanted to be successful. And as a teenager, he would, at one point in his life, he stared at a dead frog that had been laying in the sun for a while. So it was halfway decayed. And he purposefully stared at it while he was eating an orange, because he was afraid that the sight of death on the battlefield would strike fear into him. So he tried to train himself to not feel fear when he was seeing death. And he sort of was a hero. But at the same time, he lost more men than any other general in World War II. He was mission oriented, and he would send men to die during war. And my father had a friend who fought under his, I mean, he was really high up, but he was on the battle. He was a battlefield general. He didn't fight. He planned and then watched the battle as it unfolded, usually from a high point of view, so he could order things to go on. But this friend of ours who fought in Italy with him, he said he was just horrible. That he led them into really dangerous spots. So what the Allies did for a while was use him, because he was such an effective general in terms of winning battles. They used him as a decoy. They sent him to Italy, where the fighting was there was no doubt that we were going to win. The first country that Mussolini captured was Ethiopia, and Ethiopia had no guns. They used spears at the time. And that was the country he conquered, and called himself a conqueror because of that. And the Italian army was not very well trained, and was not and generally would run away from battle. And one of the friends, my father's friend, talked to one of the prisoners. He said, "Why did you run away? Why you even go into battle?" And he said, "Well, I'm not going to sacrifice my life. Italy's been Sicily was where they were fighting, the island off of Italy. Sicily's been here for thousands of years, and thousands of wars have been fought here, and I'm not going to give my life just for another one of those wars." And that was kind of what I took that as an idea of the Italian army at the time. But he just hated Patton. He hated them. The conditions were horrible, and Patton seemed to glorify in it, in his tent where he was still served real food by servants. But anyway, that's one kind of hero. And then you have heroes like Martin Luther King, who kind of grew out of a grassroots. He kind of organized a grassroots movement that was already going on, and found ways of making his struggle known to everybody, until people believed what he said. And he was seen as someone who was always working for the greater good of the people. And he was considered, during his life, by the left wing, he was considered to be a Christ-like figure, not in terms of being a god, but in terms of sacrificing himself for his cause. It was King who said, no one is really alive until they find a cause they're willing to die for. And so he kind of predicted his own death, and didn't shy away from it. And that, to me, is very, very heroic. He went to jail dozens and dozens of times and when he went to jail, the movement itself was got publicity and helped move it forward. My earliest memories of this are of the civil rights movement, and my parents were they weren't deeply into it, but they participated because people they knew were participating and would ask them to come to marches, and they always did. For me, it was kind of one of these childhood things where every year I knew we were going to go to the Peace March on this day of the year, because they always held it the same day. That was an interesting time to grow up that I wasn't aware of at the time. But there's that kind of hero too. And of course, King based his own strategies on that of Gandhi, who was also considered to be a Christ-like character within India. And of course, most Indians aren't Christian, so it's just a metaphor, not trying to ascribe that. And even Jews have an admiration for the life of Christ, even though the only record we have of Jesus's life comes to us in the New Testament. There's no other record of Jesus ever existing. But so there's a couple of different kinds of heroes, and in Ionesco's play, there's almost the most cynical kind of definition that you can find. So let's talk about besides just the obvious, how do you describe an Ionesco hero or an absurdist hero?
They're just some person put in an absurd scenario, and they react the most normally out of anyone in the action.bot, at least from the two that we've seen. And Waiting for Godot also doesn't 100% fall into that category either.
They're not considered heroes at all. Yeah, you're right. But we'll see other people. I think we'll see this again. Yeah, we'll see it. So it's weird. It is about normal people in abnormal situations, which of course is a metaphor for the growing autocracy in Romania and in Germany, that gave rise to World War II. And there are a lot of parallels today, depending on who you are. I think that the autocracy of the right wing is becoming more pronounced. In my opinion, more evil. I don't think it's a political decision anymore whether to follow the far right or not. I think it is a reflection of you as a human being. And I think a lot of people were sucked in. I don't know how, because I don't have any insight into that. But I do know a lot of good people were sucked into it. And I know a lot of conservatives, or a lot of Republicans, I guess I should say, who have actively disengaged from the Republican Party. And you know, if the autocracy, and now we're at the stage past the defensive stage, which I don't know if you remember, but there was, if you were on social media, there was a lot of defensiveness, which eventually really got replaced by bots, and nobody knew if they were actually conversing with human beings or with automatic characters who are programmed to answer in particular ways. And it's still really hard to tell. But now we have AI, so it'll be impossible to tell. But the autocracy of the right wing is moving forward to a place where in my own opinion, I would consider it evil. I would consider it is moving toward its own realization of power and a power grab. All you have to do is read Trump's platform of what he would do if he were elected. I don't know if you've read it, but it is worth a read. It is very scary, however. He wants to put all the power in the executive branch, and he wants Congress to do that for him, so he can bypass kind of what Netanyahu is doing in Israel. He wants to be able to bypass the judiciary, which is the only branch of government really that's stopping him. But that's, I mean, the realization of that in our generations, World War II was the last iteration of that. You can see that in the history of the Roman Empire. You can see that in the history of even of the Athenian Empire. You can see it all through history. The Asian empires that grew after Rome are a little bit different, because those empires were autocratic, but they never claimed to be anything else. They simply came in and conquered European areas, and no one could stop them. So anyway, I think the Ionesco hero is a really, really interesting literary character that deserves recognition, and he repeats that time and again.
I find like the way the hero is like loneliness almost, like really interesting, and like a want almost to have a sense of community, or to like to go to the other side because it'd just be easier, but the inability to, whether it's like deep down morals that you have, or just you don't fit in over there. I don't know, I find that like really human, and like the human condition of not wanting to like try so hard to do the right thing, I guess.
Right, being apathetic, being apolitical. He argues with Jean, but he's very careful about it. even if he disagrees. And his argument seemed to be that there's nothing anybody could do about anything, so don't do anything. So he's almost a pathetic kind of person who has no sense of empowerment at all. And that movement toward being heroic, he has to be pushed there every step of the way.
I also feel like with how, I don't know, bad of a hero he is, I don't know if that's the right, bad may not be the right term, but like, you know, it's not who you would see as his character. I think that's also from like a general person perspective, kind of like encouraging that if someone who's like so pathetic can do it, anybody could like do the right thing.
But he doesn't want to do the right thing. And I think the woman who was talking about seeing the first production of it, one of the most interesting things is that the first act is goofy, the second act is a little bit darker, and the third act is whoa. And I think she's right that the journey of this play takes us to a very dark place, but it also happens very suddenly at the end, which is kind of the way autocratic governments work. Hitler got into the government. He was a criminal and he was put in jail for rioting, leading a riot. And then the Nazis started, through various means, the Nazis started to gain more power. So he was given a position in the German government. He wasn't elected. He was appointed by Otto von Bismarck, who was a war hero, who was the, I think it was the president. It wasn't the president. It was the chancellor, which is kind of like the head of the Senate or the Speaker of the House. He was appointed by that person, and Hitler overthrew him. He was a fairly weak leader, although he was a great general, but he was a figurehead. And so politically, Hitler brought all the power of the government to him. And he was similar to the way Trump did. That he was elected as a populist, that he really understood the people, and they didn't realize that his messages and the violence with which he was willing to go to, even before he became the leader of the country, was indicative of who he was as a human being.
This is
Mhm.
it's kind of off topic, but like from the hero thing, but a scene I found interesting was Bernard's conversation with Duddard. I'm not sure if that's how you say his name, but like bringing it back like to today, like Trump and everything, what was I gonna say? Like he sees the situation in so black and white, like there is right and wrong,
Mhm.
and Duddard being more like like trying to understand the other side and like have almost have a like understanding. I found that situation really similar to things that I've seen happen, like
Right. And by trying to understand something that is irrational, you are indoctrinating people, you're normalizing that attitude. And I'm more important than you is a really good motivator for people whose lives are not necessarily happy or who feel they've been cheated out of their what they deserve. And Republicans have been doing that since prior to Reagan. You know, Reagan is the one who talked about welfare moms. No, welfare. Boy, I can't remember how the term he used. Welfare queens, describing a class of people, African American, who are living off the system and are taking handouts because they don't want to do anything else, and that they're ruining our country. And there was no such class. First of all, white people have always benefited from whatever welfare system we had in place much more than African American people. And most of the states that are taking money from more money from the government than they're paying to the government in taxes as a whole are red states. So there's this misinformation that goes out that's very popular to a certain part of our country, people who want to blame other people and are used to blaming other people for their own misery, when generally it's a lack of education that is guiding the poverty of the world, of our country. So it's and that's happening here too. The romanticizing of the rhinoceros as this free being that anyone can turn into as long as they are willing to stomp on everybody else that has not turned into a rhinoceros yet. They don't talk about how many people were killed by the rhinoceri. It's weird. Just as we're not really talking about how many people are being killed through the policies of the right wing. And I don't even want to say Republicans, because this is different than a Republican Party that simply saw the way to a better society in completely different terms than the left wing. But I think historically that most of those assertions, there's evidence that they don't work. We don't know whose economic system, whose economic theories are the most accurate. But we do know that when you cut taxes and cut services, it separates the haves from the have-nots. It maintains underclass. And we do know that more people die under those conditions. And there's just been a new study out that says life expectancy in the United States, especially in red states, is declining. The life expectancy today is younger than it was 70 years ago or 100 years ago. I hate to talk in terms of 70 years because, but that's what we're talking about from the 1970s, or probably the first half of the 1970s until today, where in many areas of our country, and they gave us a map, Oregon is declining, but it's not declining as much as it is in a lot of red states, except in the rural areas. So this evidence is just simply not acknowledged by those who support the economic policies that the Republicans would like to put into power. And when you're just, and it's been the same argument. The Republicans are still arguing that Biden is one of the worst presidents in history because of inflation. And yet, for almost the first time in history, wages are rising faster than inflation. Regardless of how inflation is rising, wages now are rising more. But that has a lot to do with the unemployment from the pandemic. So it's a weird situation. But people actually, if they believed it, are living better today than they did just 8 or 9 years ago. There's more money in people's hands. And that doesn't necessarily mean anything either, because if you're not one of those people, it's all statistics. So it can be a very uneven, people getting jobs in one sector and having higher salaries might be what's going on, whereas people in other areas are just as bad. But there's evidence out there that whatever economic policies you follow, one works better than the other in terms of normal people doing better. Unions are things that raise salaries and just historically, and Republicans are against unions. They think unions limit the freedom of business owners, and they do. But they don't see that there's an equity between a group of workers who say, no, that's not fair. So it's a weird thing. And I think a lot of that is captured in Rhinoceros, but it is, again, we can't think of Rhinoceros as portraying one thing. It's portraying something that moves forward in time and becomes something else. That's what theater is. It's a movement through time, regardless of what you do. There's no theater piece that even if you're storytelling, that doesn't have some sort of chronological or other kind of progression to it. And so the meaning of this play, probably a lot more so than Waiting for Godot, is more traditional because there is a beginning and a middle and an end. Whereas with Godot, we feel like we're simply moving in a circle, that there is no progress, and that's the point of the play. So there's a big difference between those two plays simply in the way they're organized and the way they're presented, that organizational structure. Did that address what you said, Tatum? Okay. Yeah, I think this play has a lot of ramifications. I think it's very, very accessible today. Again, I think it's more accessible in a postmodern world that looks past just the rhinoceros turning into something much, much deeper and much more specific in what it's talking about. And Ionesco was a genius at capturing our attention through comedy and then moving it to a much, much darker place. Sometimes really dark. And Janae begins in a dark place, the person you'll be reading next. Again, I want to kind of prepare you to help you understand this play. It has a tricky beginning. It fools the audience into thinking there's a one set of circumstances going on. And then we realize that that's completely incorrect, that there's a completely different set of circumstances going on. And most of it has to do with masks. And I don't mean something over your face, but I mean in people who are in reality role playing. And when they role play, it seems more real than when they don't. And there is a real reliance on your public face versus your private face, which is kind of Janae's whole experience in education. He was no less poetic as a criminal, as a pimp, and I think he was gay, so I think he may have also prostituted, worked as a prostitute, which I have nothing against, but he was part of that society that was like other artists, that came from a place of non-humanness because of society, but was always poetic, always had this idea that had a poetic perception of his own situation that he was able to articulate, given the opportunity to a much larger audience. So he's a very interesting playwright. I mean, his plays are really interesting, but you kind of have to understand the beginning and if you're reading the play. Because there's going to be a point in the first act of the major, you go, huh? Oh, that's weird. And it's very important to the rest of the play. It sets the scene, but if you're reading it, it doesn't quite do that. So be sensitive to that as you're reading it. I was missing a couple of papers this week. Please turn them in next week, because that's going to affect your grade if you get in the habit of not turning stuff in. And please feel free to use how you originally see each of these plays mixed in with what we talk about. Because even if after our conversation next Monday, you say to yourself, excuse me, too late. Even if you say to yourself, well, I didn't get that at all, what you did get, your understanding of it has value. Does that make sense? I went through, I started studying theater, not in high, but in college, where it was a serious thing, in 77. And it wasn't until about 1982 of constant studying, going into grad school, that, no, 1992, sorry, where I really started grasping being able to take the ideas that were inspired by me through reading a play and turn them into something, into ideas. And I still don't feel qualified to turn those ideas into productions. Sometimes yes, sometimes no. So I don't want you to feel uncomfortable not understanding them. Enjoy whatever you get from a play. And don't focus on what you don't understand. Focus on what you do understand and develop that. And many of you are doing that, which is a great thing, because in your upper division education, that's what you should be doing. And I know some of you aren't upper division now. Some of you are still in lower division. That's just juniors and seniors. But it is a process that you are in at some point in that process, and it's moving correctly. The people who don't go into theater are the ones who feel that they're not qualified even after their education, and you're not qualified simply because you have 4 years of college or 5 years of college or 20 years of college. I think I went about 20 years. But it's a process that moves you forward, that takes practice. So don't poo-poo your own instincts in a play. They usually fit in there somewhere, even amongst the professional critics or the really smart people's analysis of such plays. And embrace those analyses, even if you don't agree with them, because it's going to tell you something else. Anything else you guys want to say about Eugene Ionesco or Rhinoceros?
Yeah, I have something really quick.
All right.
Small little point about the logician character. I think that we may have touched upon this idea during our past discussion, perhaps back on Monday. However, I just want to mention the fact that despite being a logician, a lot of the time he's explaining what seems to be like logical fallacies. And two that specifically stick out or specifically one, is his association with logic and justice, or like something can only be logical if it's morally right. And I could see that definitely being a sort of like literary tool to describe how falsehoods or like false truths are often depended upon in like fascist societies, or the growth of like a fascist movement are associated with morality. Like if you don't think like us, you're just morally just straight up wrong. I thought that was an interesting thing that Ionesco included with this character.
Absolutely. And regardless of how you think, of your system of thinking, like logic is a particular way of thinking, that does not preclude you from leaning into your biases. And our biases almost always come from some sort of element of our society. Does that make sense to everybody? And societies change. I was telling my Master of Teaching students last night. We were talking about changing society, and I gave an example of something that I was involved with as an educator when I was a teenager. It was a camp thing, and they found it completely immoral what we as a camp did, and it's because the entire and they may be right, but that's not how it felt at the time. How it felt at the time is we were using role playing to allow students to make choices, and then we would always debrief them at the end of the day, because they weren't always aware of the direction that the role playing was going in. And so we fooled them into believing things that weren't true in order for them to experience without bias these things happening. And today that's considered extremely today that's considered immoral. It's considered like you're trying to fool kids, which I have no problem with. I call it play, because kids play that way all the time. But the instance that we were actually talking about is the philosophy of the camp that I was working at. It was an educational camp. Is that every camper should have physical contact with a counselor every day. And that might mean a hug, that might mean just a pat on the shoulder, and it might even mean kisses. We used to tell kids, I'm going to kiss you until you do what you're supposed to do. And it wasn't kisses like romantic kisses. There wasn't any sense of pedophilia in there. But that's not the vision that today society has. If you kiss a kid that is not your own in this society, it's bad. And I kind of take umbrage with that. You know, you may have to ask a kid, can I give you a hug now? And that's fine. You know, but always giving them the opportunity to have physical contact with other people that is not manipulative, I think is important. And I think we're kind of losing that. But anyway, that's just my own thing. So I forget what I was going back to. What was that, Isaac? Oh, so the different ways of thinking always have their biases. And the different characters that Ionesco presents in that first act are hugely important to kind of fill in how society feels about these things. Okay. You know, the demonstration in Charlottesville by right-wingers during the Trump administration was something that everyone should have said, this is horrible. We did. But I've lost my thought, because what I'm thinking is probably more biased than not, and therefore I shouldn't say it. But anyway, that's a lot of what these absurdist plays move into. I think Genet moves more into a social realm rather than a metaphysical realm, which is where Beckett works, and a more physical realm, even more so than Ionesco. I mean, Ionesco is working with social interactions and how authoritarianism can sneak its way into a liberal democratic government. But Genet makes it even more personal. So I hope you like this play. It is very dense. Again, he is not portraying everything he's portraying in The Maids is a metaphor. And I think The Maids may be his most accessible play. He has a play called there's The Blacks, and then there's another one, and I can't remember the name of it. I like it a lot better than The Maids, but it's more dense, in which 4 people are patrons at a house of prostitution that allows them to play any role they want. And while these 4, there's a judge, there is a a guy playing to be a judge, a guy playing to be a president, and there's a couple other ones, and I can't remember what they are. But while that's happening, while they're seeing a prostitute playing these roles, society completely breaks down outside of the play, of the world of the play. And these guys are forced to become the role play, the people in society that they had been pretending to be because there's no one else. And it gets really, really weird. But I think the Maids is a little bit more accessible because it's a smaller cast, and the story is a little bit simpler, and it's based on a true story of a couple of maids in France that killed their the person that they were both live-in maids. They were sisters, and they killed their mistress while and during their trial they talked about how much they loved her. This is not a realistic portrayal of that at all. It was just the inspiration. There's another play written by a feminist playwright in the 80s called In Our House. That's a more realistic portrayal of what actually happened historically in that trial. And it's completely different from this play. All right. Anything else for the good of the cause? Anything happening this week that people should be aware of so that they can go do it? Production.
Two things. I was wondering how long you want us to originally make papers.
1 to 2 pages.
2 pages. Okay, yeah. Okay.
1 to 2 pages.
1 to 2 pages. Okay. I knew it was longer when I wrote mine. So yeah.
That's okay.
And then the second is well, obviously for production, there are there's a short film audition this weekend, this Friday at the Digital Media Center.
Ooh, that's always fun.
Yeah, I'm gonna go.
I did a really stupid version of Pyramus and Thisbe for a film student down at UCLA, and it was probably one of the worst productions I've ever been in, but it was really fun. And the guy who played who's the lead mechanical in Midsummer? Bottom. The guy who played Bottom went on to some fame later. He was in the movie Valley Girl. He played the second male lead, the best friend of God, what's his name? Anybody know the movie Valley Girl? It was kind of a phenomenon when it came out because Moon Unit Zappa came out with her song Valley Girl about the same time, and she used phrases like "gag me with a spoon" and Valley Girl talk, and that's what made that famous. But who? You know who he is, and I can't think of his famous movies now. Oh well. Anyway, I'm not going to keep you because I can't think of something. So have a good weekend. We'll see you on Monday. Please don't forget to write your paper. Think it through first. Think what you want to say about the play before you start to write. So get your own attitude together and then write about that. But tell me what you're going to write about, and then tell me why you think what you think, and then conclude by saying because of all this stuff. That makes the papers a lot easier to read. Please don't forget to use your last name for the file. It didn't take me too long to download the 8 papers I got. I would have rather read 10. Hopefully the comments were helpful for you. Any questions or comments before we go? Well, hell, let's go. Have a good weekend, you guys. Take care.
Thank you.
Thank you, Eric.
Bye.
Have a good one, Eric.
Thank you, Eric.
Thank you.
Enjoy.